The resources already strained, really, really strained at the federal, state, and local level, it just costs too much money. The Bureau of Justice Statistics estimates that more than $74 billion is spent on federal, state, and local corrections annually, and it costs nearly $30,000 to house a federal inmate for a year. So how do we stop this terrible cycle? At the national level, my boss, Attorney General Eric Holder, has convened a federal reentry council to try to bring down the barriers that stop former prisoners from succeeding. The council comprises 20 federal agencies, all with common goals: to make our communities safer by reducing recidivism and victimization, to help those getting out to become productive citizens, and to save limited resources. And you'll excuse me because my allergies are just bad today, now that it's nice out. How do they do that? Well, part of it is just by raising awareness. There are a huge number of misconceptions out there about the rights and obligations of those who have served time. Can they live in public housing? Yes. Can you get tax credits for hiring them? Yes. Can employers get bonded against theft? Yes. And so, among other things, the council has promoted a series, and you can see it online, of what they call Mythbusters, answering those questions, among others. Part of it is just knocking down systemic barriers and obstacles that make it difficult for people who have already been held accountable and who have paid for their crimes to contribute productively and to support themselves, their families, and the economy. In April 2011, the Attorney General Holder sent a letter to every Attorney General of every state in the country, citing a comprehensive study cataloging more than 38,000 statutes across the 50 states and other territories that impose collateral consequences on people convicted of crimes. Although some of those restrictions undoubtedly serve public safety, many impose unnecessary burdens, including the denial of employment and housing opportunities that cripple an individual who is trying to make a new start. So he asked the states to evaluate relevant laws and policies, and he made the department's resources available to provide the support. And we in the Department of Justice have looked to our own House for conducting a review of federal collateral consequences identified in the study. Early last year, the Justice Department, under Attorney General Holder's leadership, also began a comprehensive review of the criminal justice system across the board, including the way we charge, the way we sentence, the way we incarcerate, and reentry. And that process was designed to identify areas in which federal laws can be enforced more fairly and more efficiently. The idea was to figure out which practices were more successful and which might actually be working against our goals. The resulting initial reform package, which the Attorney General has called the Smart on Crime Initiative, is already driving us to re-examine our priorities, to more fairly enforce laws and apply just punishments, to strengthen protection for vulnerable populations, and to focus even more than we were on prevention and reentry. The final piece is targeting services at the population we're trying to reach. This has to start in jail. As the director of the Federal Bureau of Prisons has pointed out, most federal prison inmates leave needing job skills, vocational training, education, counseling, and other assistance such as drug abuse treatment, anger management, parenting skills, and a link to community resources for continuity of care if they are to continue and to successfully enter society. In other words, today's Bureau of Prisons realizes that reentry begins the day that an inmate enters and not when he or she leaves. And I have to say, I have a former client. I spent 12 years in private practice in between my government stints. And I have a client who firmly believes that reentry actually needs to start before they go in, that during the process of preparing to go, that the families and the defendant need to grapple with how they're going to survive during the time that that person is away. And we have to help them do that too. And it has to continue in the halfway houses where many federal inmates begin their reintegration. But for too long, the policies and the culture of those facilities were actually counterproductive in lots of ways. So just last month, Attorney General Holder announced that the Justice Department would require federal halfway houses, which saw 30,000 inmates go through their doors in just the past year, to enhance their treatment services. Those houses will now have to provide a specialized form of treatment to prisoners, including those with mental health and substance abuse issues, to provide greater assessment to inmates who are pursuing job opportunities, such as, and think about this, permitting them to have cell phones in the halfway houses so they can actually talk to employers and prospective employers and not be out of touch when they're there, and to provide funds for their transportation. In other words, allowing inmates expanded access to re-enter society while they are in the halfway house. But even that isn't enough. So here's how we got to courtroom 2A. 3 years ago, I asked people in my office and people in the courthouse if we could do better. I asked if we had the resources, the time, the money, and the commitment to try something new. There were others who were already running or participating in reentry projects around the country, but we had never done it in federal court in New Jersey. Those conversations and the hard work of a lot of people led to the development of the first federal reentry court in New Jersey, what we call our Renew program. That hard work, and most of all, the hard work of the program participants who have dedicated themselves to reimagining their lives, are why courtroom 2A is such a special place. Because we know that it isn't enough just to provide the right services. We have to provide them at the right time, in the right way. Former offenders are at a unique crossroad, poised to become law-abiding contributors to society or frequent flyers in the criminal justice system. They need to know the path of redemption is theirs to choose, and that they will be supported in that journey and in that decision to leave what is familiar and trade it in for the prospect of a better future. To be clear, this is not a program for white-collar criminals who just did 18 months in a minimum security prison. The participants in our program were convicted of manufacturing and distributing dangerous narcotics, of selling and transporting firearms, and other very serious and dangerous crimes. They served years, in some cases 10 years or more, in federal prison, and were determined to be some of the most likely to reoffend, not the least likely. Because of those challenges, it is not all smooth sailing. They have to work long hours at difficult jobs, often more than one, and pursue challenging education and other programs to make progress. Some have family members who are just not supportive, and others have the wrong friends who just want to reunite with their old buddies. Some just are not quite ready to turn away from their previous lives. So like everybody else, some of our participants make mistakes. There are excuses, impediments, and apologies. And there are sanctions. Some have to stay in the program for longer, losing credit. Some end up being directed to do some community service, and others get some additional house arrest. But all of it is geared toward getting those individuals back on their feet, ready and able to make it. And every 2 weeks, they remind us why this work is so important, and they impress us with their ability to evolve and to persevere. Amare Terrell was a straight A student until at around the age of 13, he began to rebel against his mother. He was sent to live with his paternal grandparents and with his father, a heroin addict who introduced him to the drug culture of the streets. He dropped out of high school, had a number of run-ins with the law, and in December of 2008 was prosecuted by my office for conspiracy to distribute heroin. Last year, he was one of the first to participate voluntarily in our reentry court. Now, in front of Judge Arleo and other participants, Mr. Terrell is leading in a different way. He obviously takes his role as a father very seriously. He talks to the judge about his need for health insurance and a 401k. And he's focused on what he needs to do to keep his life on track. Last winter, as the Governor McGreevey alluded to, winter like New Hampshire, one of the people in the program talked to Mr. Terrell about the fact that with the impending snowstorm, he was worried because he had no food in his house. And those of you who know the urban areas in Essex County know that grocery stores are not so plentiful, and he didn't know what he was going to do. Mr. Terrell told him to meet him in 10 minutes at a grocery store, where he bought him $70 worth of groceries. And with our encouragement, Mr. Terrell recently spoke to a group of people suspected of committing the worst crimes in a neighborhood in Newark and presented a powerful message about what he lost when he broke the law. Next month, Amare Terrell will be one of the first 4 to graduate from our program, and he knows what that means to him and to us. Also graduating is Eddie Wilson. Eddie's mother and father were intravenous drug users who both died of HIV/AIDS. He was raised by his grandmother, who also passed away when Mr. Wilson was still a teenager. He was prosecuted by my office for selling guns and ammunition to an undercover ATF agent. From the start of Reentry Court, Mr. Wilson was focused on getting his college degree, which has led to Judge Arleo calling him the professor in court. His dedication is clear. He lived in a shelter until he could save enough money to pay for his own apartment. But he never seemed down. When asked by the judge about his situation, he might say it was hard because he didn't have any food, or he might let her know that he had to be out of the shelter by 7 o'clock in the morning. But he would also say that it was probably good because it helped him get up earlier to start studying. And the judge, encouraging his dedication, has helped him to get a job at the college he attends. Like Mr. Terrell, Mr. Wilson shows real ownership of this program. More than a few times, he has come to court and alerted everybody else, the judge, the people from probation, the U.S. Attorney's Office of Defenders, and his fellow participants about other programs in town which might help them with rent and furniture. Through these contributions and being a role model, he has probably taught everybody else in the program as much as we have taught him. Mohammed Shabazz, the last of the three I'll talk about, is one of our newest participants. He was released from a halfway house only in February. He also has the distinction of having served 14 years or so in federal prison, one of the longest sentences of anyone in the reentry court for distribution of heroin and cocaine. In spite of that, or maybe because of it, he comes across in court as someone who is spiritual and has thought a great deal about how he wants to live his life and what comes next. He has a job and has resumed a stable relationship with the woman to whom he was engaged when he went to prison. He has a facility for math and will likely return to school to study accounting. One side note on the extent to which our reentry court is completely full service. Shortly after he joined the program, Mr. Shabazz made the mistake, perhaps, maybe not a mistake, of telling the court that he had resumed living with a longtime girlfriend and that they had had a religious wedding, but they were not formally married.